My name is Cy Young. I'm reading from my book Onions. This is Chapter 1. C.W. Meets His Match. Charles Wesley Onions hated everything. He hated his father for dying when C.W. was 6 and leaving him alone with his alcoholic mother. He hated his mother for sending him off to a foster home when he was 7. He hated his foster mom, who beat him, and the 15 other foster parents who abused him and made him work before and after school. But most of all, C.W. hated himself. He was chubby, had freckles popping out all over his face, and his nose was too short. At 12, he was big for his age, and he knew his clot of red hair made him a target for those stupid, snot-nosed kids at school. His eyes revealed the weariness gained from too many blows delivered too early in his young life. This was C.W.'s state of mind when he tried to steal Sandra Fuller's purse. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and C.W. had just gotten out of school. He'd only been attending Mark Twain Middle School for 2 months, having just been sent to his 16th foster home in 2 years. His new foster mother, Mrs. Williams, had 2 young kids and a baby, and C.W. once again felt like an intruder. She hadn't abused him, at least so far. He was expecting the worst. He knew she'd taken him in for only one reason. Oh, that was the payment she received from the state adoption agency. Mrs. Williams had already mentioned several times that C.W. had to work. She needed the money. They always needed the money. He thought about robbing a bank and taking off, but there was something called prison, and he'd heard that prison wasn't a nice place for young boys with freckles. C.W. was gliding slowly down the sidewalk on his skateboard near the town square of Lozin when he saw Sandrin's hotshot pull to the curb 50 feet ahead of him. As he watched, Sandrin hopped briskly out of the car with the alacrity of a trained athlete, hurried to a parking meter, and opened her purse. C.W. saw his chance. He picked up his skateboarding pace and zoomed toward what he thought was a helpless senior. Just as Sandrin arrived at the meter, C.W. whipped by, snatched the purse, and sped away. In a shot, the senior jumped back in her car, switched on the ignition, and screeched away from the curb. C.W. looked over. To his surprise, the hotshot was zipping along beside him. Suddenly, the car accelerated, came to an open driveway ahead of him, and did a sharp right-angle turn under the sidewalk, cutting off its escape. C.W. slammed into the side of the hotshot and hit the ground hard. Without a pause, Sandrin was out of the car and standing over the thief. She snatched her purse back as C.W. began moaning and holding his leg. When he glanced up at her, he had the fleeting impression of an army sergeant he'd seen in a cable movie who tripped a new recruit and sent him sprawling in the mud. Her blue eyes were blazing spotlights that shot right through him, and C.W. knew instantly he'd made a big mistake. "Really hurts, huh?" "Yeah," C.W. said between moans, milking the minor wound for all it was worth. "Good, let's get a cop." C.W. sat up. If Mrs. Williams found out what he'd done, he'd be sent away again. "Please, lady, please, don't get the cops," he pleaded. "I'm sorry, I'm really, really sorry. I need money. I can't get a job." A crowd was gathering as Sandrin's eyes continued boring into him. "Yeah, I've heard that before." "I'm not kidding, I swear." Sandrin eyed the kid skeptically, then paused. "You want a job?" Yeah, I'll do anything, I swear." By now the crowd had grown to a small mob. C.W. glanced around with the look of a trapped ferret. Sandrin thought a moment, then made a decision. "Come on." The City Hall of Lozin, Arizona, located in the town square, was a yellowed 4-story rectangular building that had seen better days. It had a short lawn bordering the sidewalk, and an old Civil War cannon stood under a hickory tree to the right of the entranceway. An American flag was draped from the second floor, along with the flag of Arizona. The ledge above the flags was occupied by a string of pigeons who often relieved themselves on the sidewalk below. Visitors had complained about having to circumvent the mess, but no action had been taken. The town was named Lozin. The female Apache, it was named after Lozin, the female Apache who fought beside Geronimo in the 1800s. Lozin was a legendary warrior with special powers. She was a skilled shaman who could foretell the location of the enemy. She accomplished this feat by going to a deserted area and raising her upturned hands to the sky. Then she would turn slowly in a circle. When her palms tingled, she stopped and knew that this was the direction from which the enemy would attack. The intensity of the tingling told her how close they were. Losin saved her fellow warriors and tribe countless times by this amazing power of vaticination. That's Vaticination, vaticination, a new word for you. The city had become the center of an important agricultural and cattle region. There were many wealthy cattlemen and farmers with money to burn, and Mayor Squiggins knew how to appeal to their sense of pride and pocketbooks. The idea of putting Losin on the cultural map had given rise to the private funding of many art galleries, a museum, and several libraries. The leap to a fancy sports dome that would be available for local high school football games, track meets, and maybe even an Olympics was a logical one, and after numerous city council meetings, wealthy folks invited, the mayor and his supporters had sold the idea to a number of backers. Sandrin Fuller was standing on the sidewalk in front of the City Hall building behind a card table piled high with flyers and circulars. A somewhat bewildered C.W. was pacing on the sidewalk nearby wearing a "No on the Sports Dome" picket sign over his shoulders and passing out flyers. A couple approached Sandrin's card table and read the sign. As the man studied the information on the flyer, he asked, "Why are you against it? Most people think it's a great idea. It'll do a lot of good for the city." "It's all in the flyer," Sandrin replied as she handed the man and his companion a circular. "Vote no on the dome. It's an albatross," she yelled to a woman passing by. C.W. had been checking his new boss out of the corner of his eye, trying to get a handle on the requirements of his new job. A woman passing by glanced at the sign hanging around his neck. "What's this all about?" she asked. C.W. stared at her blankly. "I don't know," he shrugged, handing the woman a flyer. "Something about an albatross." Mayor Squiggins' office was on the 4th floor of City Hall, with a window facing the street. As of yet, the mayor hadn't heard about Sandrin Fuller and her campaign against City Hall, but he was about to. Her chant could be heard floating up from below. The room was a typical politician's office with faded pictures of past office holders dotting the wall behind the mayor. A tall, thin man with a ruddy face, a white mustache, and bushy eyebrows which dominated his face. They'd never been trimmed or plucked or brushed or singed, and now they were just running amok above the mayor's eyes. His nose was bulbous and very red. Mayor Squiggins had rosacea, a chronic inflammatory disorder of the proboscis. It made it red and swollen. It looked like a bad case of acne. He'd tried every remedy on the market, but nothing worked except ice packs. That's why he had a small cooler under his desk. There was also room in the cooler for a 6-pack of beer, which he imbibed daily at lunch with his usual ham and cheese on rye and potato chips. On the floor under the mayor's desk, there was a multicolored throw rug that was more practical than decorative. It covered coffee stains from past years, several cracks in the wood floor that had been widening at an alarming rate since the mayor had taken office several years earlier. An old mildewed couch was stuck against the wall opposite the mayor. It looked like a throwback to the days of King Louis III. The overall atmosphere was one of musty degeneration, corruption, and throat-gagging cigar smoke which was presently filling the room. The ambiance of decay in the room was a reflection of the 3 self-satisfied men now occupying it. Squiggins was sitting behind a huge, old-fashioned mahogany desk, studying a newspaper. The desk was cluttered with magazines, local bulletins from advocacy groups, and requests for personal favors in the form of donated coffee mugs, snow globes, plaques, and other cheap bribes. The mayor was obviously enjoying what he was reading. A smug smile of satisfaction broke out on his face as he spoke. Results of the latest poll on Prop 3. For the dome, 71%. Against the dome, 13%. Don't know, 9%. Scriggins tossed the paper onto his desk and picked up a glass of champagne. Well, boys, looks like we're in business. Councilman Ted Bixel, a charismatic, trim-looking man in his early 30s, had his back turned to the mayor. He'd been looking out the window, checking the activity on the sidewalk below. Bixel had a law degree from USC where he'd played wide receiver. The Trojans had won the Rose Bowl his second year on the team. He'd never gotten over it. He milked the big man on campus routine to the hilt, always had lots of girlfriends, and was the life of continuous parties. His social graces were lacking, but he made up for it with his good looks and charm. Bixel came from money. He seldom had to mix with the riff-raff, who were wage earners. His father was a wealthy cattleman in the county, and Ted had an easy path to city councilman. He'd met his wife, Marcia, at USC. Although he had a high profile as a politician on the way up, Marcia was the power behind the man. Bixel closed the window, shutting out Sandrin's chant, and picked up a glass of champagne from the mayor's desk. To the Scriggins Sports Dome, Your Honor. To my bank balance, Councilman Bixel, Scriggins responded, raising his glass. And to yours. That is, if Zinnerman Construction is going to be as grateful to us as he's been in the past. The mayor turned to the third man in the room, Sam Zinnerman, a short, heavy-set, jolly thug lounging in an easy chair across from Scriggins. Zinnerman was smoking an obscenely large cigar, which was the source of the gray smog billowing out of his petulant mouth and darkening the room with its noxious fumes. His short, hefty legs were crossed at the ankles, revealing his passion for red, green, and orange argyle socks. Zinnerman raised his glass. His thin-lipped smile was like the bottom line of a ledger. Gentlemen, he announced, I will pour you out a blessing. Then he slurped the champagne down in one loud gulp. It was dusk when Sandra Fuller and her new recruit approached the hotshot. After tying the card tables to the rear of the car, Sandrin opened her purse, took out a $5 bill, and handed it to the kid. C.W. stared at the bill, having trouble computing his good fortune. Thanks, he stammered. You earned it. Stay out of trouble. Sandrin walked around to the driver's side of the car and opened the door. Oh, what's the dome? C.W. asked. Sandrin paused, studying him. You live in Lozin and you don't know? C.W. struggled, then looked away. I just moved here. Where do you live? I'm with Mrs. Williams on 14th Avenue. He hesitated, not sure if he should reveal his situation. She's my new foster mom. Sandrin looked at him with keener interest. How many have you had? This is my 16th, C.W. said, dreading her reaction. Sandrin retrieved C.W.'s skateboard from inside the car and handed it to him. Got a name? Charles Wesley Onions, C.W. A relative of mine put a dictionary together. Oh, which one? I don't know. I think it was in England, Oxford or something. Sandrin paused, deep in thought, studied the boy for a moment. Are you speaking about Charles Talbot Onions, English lexicographer and entomologist? C.W. shrugged. Yeah, I guess so. Sandrin got in the car and started the engine. Well, Mr. Onions, I could use a helper. Saturday morning, 8:30 sharp, 105th Avenue off Highway 60. $2 an hour. Deal? Yeah, okay. Shaking her head at the yeah, Sandrin shot away from the curb and sped down the street and disappeared around the corner. C.W. looked at the $5 bill in his hand. It was all his to spend. Oh, a feeling of euphoria swept over him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He was thinking about all the different things he could buy when he sped a comic book store a block away. He shoved the bill in his pocket, jumped on his skateboard, and took off down the street. The pain in his leg caused by his fall on the cement sidewalk was suddenly gone.